Let's talk a little about Dr. Verma. So, Synergistiq Wellness was founded in 2013 by Dr. Verma. After years of feeling unfulfilled treating patients traditionally, Dr. Verma decided to change course, following her passion to educate and heal each individual as a whole, not as a fragmented and dissected collection of systems. Today, Dr. Verma is deeply committed to the importance of integrative medicine and practices exactly what she preaches, living her life the same way that she expects her patients to. Synergistic Wellness represents peace, renewal, and rebirth, as the practice was born during a challenging time in Dr. Verma's personal life. From the beginning, her goal has been to create a practice that could give patients an opportunity for a healthier and happier version of their existence. So I'll give it over to Dr. Verma, and we will be taking some questions at the end, so make sure you type them in the question box and we'll try to get to those. All right, Dr. Verma.
Wonderful, thank you. Let me just pull up my presentation here.
Perfect.
Okay, let's see, PowerPoint. Okay. Thank you, Emily, for the nice introduction. So welcome everybody tonight on this Tuesday night. I'm here down here in Clearwater, Tampa Bay. I'm originally from New York, New Jersey. I was born in New York, raised in Jersey, did all my schooling there up to my residency. I went to Robert Wood Johnson Rutgers Medical School. And then I've been down here in Florida for about 16 years. Came down here because my ex-husband had to finish a surgical fellowship, and we were in Miami for a year and then settled here. So I have mother to 3 amazing teen boys, and I just recently opened up my second location in Tampa. So I have 2 offices now. I am a double board certified integrative MD, and I started off as a family practitioner. And I just really got jaded with the traditional healthcare system, and I was really looking to practice what I preach and be very proactive and preventative in my healthcare with my patients, because that's the life I live. So I didn't want to be contradictory in what I was doing. And so I do a lot of in-depth testing in my practice. I do a variety of things. I actually have a potpourri practice. I do a lot of IV therapy. I do gut health, genetics, micronutrient testing, hormones, thyroid, adrenals. I do medical marijuana. I do fitness. I have a lot of recently started aesthetics, so that's a big part of my practice as well. So it's more of like a one-stop shop. I want people to come in and really just utilize all my services, and that's kind of how it evolved. So I really kind of started from scratch. Nutrigenomics is something I was actually supposed to speak last year before the pandemic. I do speak for A4M, and this was actually my topic for Vegas last year, but however, that all got canned because of the pandemic. So I really started looking into nutrigenomics. I'm a plant-based physician, so I really do encourage my patients to follow a clean diet, which will help them with a variety of things. My 4 pillars of health are clean diet, exercise, restorative sleep, and stress reduction. Food for me is very important in terms of how I counsel my patients. I do tell them food is their medicine or it's their poison. I don't think we stress enough how important our diet is on predicting our health and our outcomes with diseases, whether you have a genetic predisposition or not. I do also explain to my patients that about only 25% of what happens to us is related to our genetics, where about 75% is related to our lifestyle. We often are not told how important our lifestyle is, and we tend to be very reactive. And as a traditionally trained MD, that's how I've been really kind of taught is, you just kind of go through life, cruise along until something happens, and then you try to fix it. What I'm doing as an integrative MD is really looking to stop that process, to slow it down, whether it's slowing down the aging process and just being preventative and proactive and using what we have, which we have a miraculous human body and all the systems working together. So I really stress the synergy of mental, physical, emotional, sexual health, and everything that a patient does, because we don't really need to dissect the body. So nutrigenomics was very interesting to me because it's the way we look at how, the foods that we eat affect the genes, vice versa. There's nutrigenomics and there's nutrigenetics. So this has come into play recently, definitely in the past decade. I started I grew up as a vegetarian, and doing plant-based medicine was something kind of I started way back when it wasn't even really talked about and known. But now if you kind of are, in social media and reading the news, you do see a lot of people really trying to clean up their diet, whether it's going vegan or going plant-based or trying to reduce the amount of inflammatory foods that they're eating. So I do counsel my patients on that. So what is nutrigenomics? It is the scientific study of the interaction with your nutrition and your diet and genes, and really in regard to the prevention and, or treatment of disease. So what I do is I do a lot of in-depth labs, look at patients, try to assess what they have, look at their past medical history. The study of how food affects a person's genes and how a person's genes affect the way the body responds to food. So nutrigenomics specifically, we're using this to learn more about how our genes and our diet together will affect our overall health and risk of developing certain diseases, such as cancer, for instance, or cardiovascular disease or metabolic disease. Nutrigenomics also characterizes the impact of all aspects of nutrients as food-based, dietary restrictions, or nutraceuticals on the gene expression. So this is what this field is doing, really kind of what we're eating and how it affects our genetic expression. So nutrigenetics is kind of the opposite. So a lot of people will interchangeably use those terms, which is not really correct. So nutrigenomics, like I said, is the foods that we're eating, how it affects our genes, whereas nutrigenetics is kind of the reverse. So it's looking at our genetic variation, our genes, and how that's going to determine what we eat. So the influence of nutrients on the genetic expression is called nutrigenomics, like I went over, whereas the heterogeneous response of the genetic variants to the nutrients is called nutrigenetics. So the best example I could think of is PKU, phenylketonuria. So we're looking at that genetic mutation, and then that's determining really what we eat, which obviously people with PKU are looking to have them on a low phenylalanine diet. But for the purpose of tonight, we're going to be talking about nutrigenomics. So just little basics. I always like to start off, and if you know this, I apologize, but just kind of what's a genome. So it is an organism's complete set of the DNA, which is obviously the chemical compound that contains the genetic instructions, which will develop and direct the activities of every organism, every living organism. We know that DNA are double-stranded, they're the paired strands, and they have the nucleotide bases, and they're made up of the 4 chemical units. If you remember back to college when we had biochemistry and biology and all those science courses we needed, we have adenine, thymine, guanine, and cytosine, and obviously they pair A with T and C with G. The human genome is miraculous. It contains about 3 billion of these base pairs, and all resides in just about 23 pairs of chromosomes within the nucleus of our cells. I mean, that's truly amazing. But each chromosome contains 100 to thousands of genes, which will carry these instructions for marking the proteins. So each of these estimated 30,000 genes in the human genome just makes an average of only about 3 proteins. While 98% of our genes are all the same, the protein coding genes comprise only 2% of our genome. And this small part is called the exome, and that contains the genes that defines our unique traits, such as why we're different than the next person, right? The lactose sensitivity, why one person might be super sensitive to dairy or gluten, how we differentiate our body frame, our eye color, our hair type. We're all unique in those ways. So that's the genetic instructions that will instruct these proteins that create our phenotypic and genotypic traits. So phenotypic will be the visible traits that the genotype expresses, right? The genotype is what is encoded in the genes, and then that thereby will translate into the phenotype, which will be the physical characteristics. So while we all have pretty much the same genes, we have genetic variants that can impact on what our appearance is, what we may be allergic to, and what the specific requirements of our bodies are that we need to thrive. Through the studies of the human genome, researchers and scientists have discovered that different people will respond in different ways to different diet and nutrition because of these DNA variations. And this can have a significant impact on how we metabolize foods, how we process nutrients and vitamins, supplements, the propensity for obesity, for example, how we need to exercise. I've been doing this kind of genetic testing, and I started off with another company, and just looking at the types of exercise. One person might be more of an endurance athlete, where another person might be more amenable to heavy weightlifting. So we're all different. And I always say there's no cookie cutter lifestyle. There's no cookie cutter diet. Just because your friend did that and lost 20 pounds doesn't mean you can do the same thing and lose 20 pounds. And I often see patients come in, they'll be like, my girlfriend just did this diet and she lost 25 pounds. I've been doing the same exact thing. I only lost 5 pounds. What's the issue? There are so many other factors that go into play. So what can nutrigenomics teach us about our body? It can reveal a number of health-related issues that can help us better understand what fuels the body and what doesn't. So for example, nutrigenomics can help us understand why some of us are lactose or gluten intolerant and why some of us can eat it without significant issues, or what specific type of diet can help us manage our weight and how we process micronutrients. What's even more important is when I was doing this testing many years ago, I was actually looking at macronutrients because so many people will say, I need to do a high protein, a low carb diet. And it's not really that simple. And it's not the best way to maintain. It's not sustainable, right? Doing a keto diet, for example, versus a low carb. And so what I would do is I would elucidate the information for the patients and let them know if we do this kind of testing, you're going to actually see you need about 45 to 55% carbs, but you need the right carbs. It's not about breads and pasta. It's about eating the right types of fruits and vegetables and lentils, certain whole grains. So there's a lot of misconceptions out there about the macros, and then that in turn is going to affect how we process our micronutrients, which are vitamins, minerals, and antioxidants. So by determining a diet that can align with our genetic variants and our body's needs, we find it easier to manage weight, we can feel better. I do a lot of food sensitivity testing, and people might not just have GI issues, maybe they're complaining of feeling sluggish after they eat, having a headache, having mood swings, having rashes. So that's really important also in what I do, is really looking at what we're eating and how it's interacting with our genetics. So for example, if you didn't know you were gluten intolerant, you may not realize that the lethargy or the bloating was a result of maybe the bread that we had the day before, when we're out, or for the sandwich that we were eating. So nutrigenomics also can help determine that what we need to eat in terms of the macros, right? Do we need more healthy fats in our diet? Do we need to reduce the amount of carbs or eat a food that is richer in certain vitamins? So everyone's going to be different when we look at the testing. With a comprehensive view of the body's needs, we can ensure that we choose the right foods that will help us feel optimal in our health, right? Energized, healthy, satiated, just overall waking up every day not feeling like we have some issue going on. So I always ask my patients in their health history questionnaire, when did you ever feel your best? How do you feel when you wake up in the morning? Like, what do you do? And so many people they just get used to not feeling well. And when I start working on their health and making them realize their potential, they don't realize how good they can feel until they feel that way. So it's really important to take time and ask the patients how they're feeling on a daily basis. And do they think they can feel better? When do they feel their best? So why is nutrigenomics now coming to the forefront when it seems like it's something that should have been there for so long? So most physicians, practitioners might say to us that, staying fit at a healthy weight is about 25% exercise, 75% diet. I mean, these numbers can vary. But regardless of how much sometimes we exercise, ultimately our diet really plays a key role in our weight. I have seen people for years go to the gym and do the same thing. And honestly, they look the same to me. They don't look any different. I remember being a member at a gym. I was there for 4 years, and I'd walk in and see the same people. Literally, it's like time stopped. Like, they looked the same. Nothing changed. And I don't think they lost any weight. They would just do it because it was part of their ritual to go to the gym and socialize. But at the end of the day, food is important. I keep saying food's your medicine or it's your poison. And it does determine our longevity and the results, the outcomes of our health, and influences our weight, our gut health, and even chronic diseases and our predisposition. And that's something like epigenetics, when our lifestyle is really influencing what our genes are. Because remember, I said about 25% of what happens to us is really our genetics. So diabetes, hypertension, hyperlipidemia, autoimmune disease, all these types of disease processes are going to be influenced by what we eat. So we know that we have to eat plenty of fruits and vegetables. Obviously, we remember the food pyramid, and we should limit our fast food intake and have a very well calibrated diet. And again, there's no cookie cutter rules, but without actually taking a deep dive into our genetics and our current health, we might not realize that we have micronutrient deficiencies, or we have disproportionate ratios of our macronutrients. So not everyone benefits, again, from following a certain type of diet, high protein, low carb, etc. So it's all about balance, knowing our genetics, and again, I'm saying there are no cookie cutter diets or no cookie cutter rules for everybody. Nutrigenomics, I just like to put some fun slides and pictures. Did I go backwards? Sorry. Okay. Nutrigenomics, again, just kind of the differentiation, because people will tend to interchange those terms and it's not really appropriate to do so. So as you can see, this is a very simple slide. nutrigenetics is how our genes affect our response to our food. So again, that going back to that example of PKU. So we look at our genetics, and that's going to dictate really how we have to eat. Versus nutrigenomics, what we're eating and how it affects our genes and how their behavior is. Nutrigenomics, so this is kind of a busy slide, but just really looking at, if you look at the top right corner, what we're eating and how it influences our genetics. I do a lot of testing, just even in my basic labs with MTHFR and all those type of genetic mutations. We call them SNPs, single nucleotide polymorphisms. And these are basically going to influence those things. So kind of looking at everything as a whole, and our DNA, our RNA, what proteins are expressed, and what it does to our body. So obviously if we're eating, up there you see the hot dog versus the broccoli, what it does to us, and eating fast food and excess meat and dairy, and how that puts extra stress on our body and causes oxidative stress, metabolic stress, inflammation, which I always say to everybody is the root of all evil. It causes everything from physical unrest to mental issues, and it just affects us on all levels. And then if you look at the green with the broccoli, and you can see how you're basically, it's an anti-inflammatory, it's not going to cause any upregulation in the genes and cause inflammation, and you have more of a balanced you have a homeostasis, right? The healthy physiological state. Nutrigenomics, you're looking at this Venn diagram, is kind of right in the center, and how it influences the health, the diet, and the genetics. So I kind of look at this as a big picture. Again, these are simple slides, but these are things, again, when we're talking, you want to be able to explain to patients in simple terms, and it's easier for patients to learn. So when you show them these kind of things, it makes more sense to them rather than showing them some very complicated diagrams. Nutrigenomics, again, eating according to our genes. And a lot of things that we see, one of the tests that I used to do back in the day was like looking at how someone metabolizes caffeine or alcohol, right? Why can someone have 5 drinks and feel fine, and then someone can have 1 drink and they're on the floor and they feel terrible and they feel nauseous? So again, it's how we metabolize things, right? How these foods will affect our genes and how we metabolize things. And the main thing too is, in looking at this, and especially with the Vibrant American NutriPro panel, is looking at our genetics and how it influences, or the foods we eat, how it influences the genes, and looking at those micronutrients basically. And that's what we're going to be doing in that panel. So, oh, sorry, this is a little off center, but NutriPro. So this is the Vibrant American NutriPro panel. And this test, and I'll show you some samples, the reports, how it measures various genetic mutations present in someone's body to gauge the scope of genetic predispositions that an individual might have towards achieving optimum nutrition. So this is going to help guide people in what to eat, what they need to increase on in their diet. Someone might need more dark leafy greens than someone else who might need something else that has to supply them with these extra micronutrients. So the actual nutrient values are measured in the serum, the RBC, and the WBC, which is awesome. So we have all these 3 different aspects. What NutriPro includes is the scope of predisposition affecting nutrient absorption. So again, one person might absorb something better, where someone else might have a genetic issue where they're not utilizing it properly. It also looks at the scope of predispositions affecting nutrient transport, predispositions affecting the conversion of nutrients to the forms that are actually absorbable by the body. So this is something like when I look at MTHFR, looking at a methyl B12 versus just or a folate, methylfolate versus a folic acid or another form of the B12. So that's an example of that. Scopes of predispositions that affect cellular uptake of the nutrients, and the actual nutrient levels measured across the serum. Again, extracellular, the RBC, and the WBC, because as you can see from this, you're going to get differences in the nutritional status. So where extracellular is going to give you a little bit more of a recent nutritional status, something that happened in the past few days and week, we have then the WBC, the intracellular, which is more of a long-term, more of a chronic kind of look at what's going on. So we'll get now into the NutriPro panel, Vibrant Wellness, what they are doing. First, I like to kind of assess who really needs a NutriPro. I mean, in a perfect world, really everybody should be getting this type of testing, honestly, because food is something, food, diet, this is something that we need to survive, right? So this is going to dictate how we're going to express certain medical conditions down the road, what chronic diseases are going to come to light. So conditions and symptoms associated with nutritional genetic abnormalities include nutrient excesses, mood disorders, cardiometabolic disorders, people with nutrient malabsorption, a history of anemia, nutrient deficiencies, bone-related disorders, because we're looking at certain molecules and vitamins and minerals that can affect that. Neurologic and mood disorders. I love that we talk about mental health. Mental health is so important, and we often separate, and at least as a traditional MD, I'm kind of taught that the mental and physical are not really working together. And, you know, of course, in our we have specialists for everything, which is fine, and that's great. But we have to also learn to look at the body as a whole. And I'm very big on mind, body, spirit, and looking at everything as a whole. So obviously, what we eat will have an effect on our mental health and our mood disorders. Eating too much of a certain thing with too many chemicals or foods that have a lot of hormones and antibiotics, that does affect how we feel, how our mood is and our mental health is. Age-related disorders, inflammatory disorders, of course, these are very general categories, but under there we can get more into detail. Athletic performance. I think this is very, very important for athletes. I mean, I grew up as a competitive athlete and a dancer, and I wish at that time I kind of knew what really would work for my body. I did grow up as a vegetarian, so that means I did have dairy and I did have eggs. But, you know, kind of knowing I have a very petite body frame. I'm 5'4", I'm like about 102 pounds, but I've always been like that. And even after having 3 boys, who are now teenagers, and they are actual athletes as well too, knowing, you know, I still look at my 3 boys and I see their different body types and the way that they eat, how it affects them. I think this is very important, especially in athletic performance, so you can optimize the performance. So this is basically what the NutriPro panel includes. As you can see, we're looking at the different vitamins, minerals, fatty acids, and amino acids. And then we're actually looking at the SNPs, the genes, right? The SNPs, again, are single nucleotide polymorphisms. And these are the little genetic variants that occur that cause different alleles, right? This is what causes the mutation in the genes and what makes someone different. SNPs can occur on any level, and, you know, what makes someone have brown eyes versus blue eyes or have a different body type than the other. So it is expressed in different ways. So as you can see, we're looking at some very common, you know, vitamins. A lot of people, I do a lot of micronutrient testing as well. And doing micronutrient testing along with this is really important because people can see what they're deficient in, and then you compare it with this and show people, well, here, you have this genetic predisposition to have elevated levels of this or lower levels of this, and this is why you're not absorbing. This explains why you're consistently low in your ascorbic acid, for example, why you're not able to hold on to it. And this is a great way. And then the amino acids, looking at that. Minerals, I'm really, really big on minerals. I think we often neglect that. Just kind of, I do a lot of iodine testing, zinc, which is very important for your overall health and immunity as well, thyroid function, all that stuff. So we have a sample here. This is like the first page. So you can kind of, I'm not going to read every single thing on here, but just really looking at the interpretation. So the way that the NutriPro panel is designed is actually designed with 3 sections. So the first section is actually providing diet suggestions. They call it precision diet suggestions and precision supplement suggestions. And that's based on the person's genetic mutations and their actual nutrient values across those 3 categories. We talked about serum, RBC, and WBC. So that's how Vibrant America is measuring it. And then the dietary choices are organized under these categories of fruits, vegetables, legumes, animal proteins, dairy, and fiber, which is great. Again, so this is going to be suited to what kind of diet the patient is wanting to follow. And then they give you the supplement choices. They're provided in a table, and they will suggest a quantity based on the RDA, which is known as a recommended daily allowance. The second section in NutriPro in this panel is called the NutriPro summary. And this will provide a concise information of the genetic mutations, the actual nutrient values, and the trend line. So they'll actually kind of graph it of the actual nutrient values from the testing. And they'll actually look at how they're monitoring it based on the modulation of the diet, the supplement and lifestyle changes that are implemented, by the patient with their provider. And they'll actually break this down into 3 tables: vitamins and minerals, amino acids, and fatty acids, like you saw on the previous slide. The third section of this report will then give you a detailed explanation of each nutrient and the description of the genetic SNP, the SNP, and the role with respect to that particular nutrient. So I have a sample page on that, and I'll show you. So this is really kind of how and if most of you are familiar with Vibrant America and you do their testing, you'll know that the reports are very well delineated. They provide a nice and they provide nice information about what's being tested and what the results are and kind of the recommendations for it. So this is a sample report we have here based on the vitamins, the minerals, the amino acids. So based on this sample report for this person, they're showing you what the suggested supplementation is for this particular person. So you can kind of go down and see. It's going to vary obviously from person to person depending on their genetics. So this is a sample page that I took from looking at the health components. So we're actually looking at the vitamins and minerals. And then if you go to the next column, you actually see the SNP. So for people who are really, into the science behind it and the nerdy, and they just want to really know what the particular SNP is, you're going to have that. So they delineate that. The third column is the most important one to me. It's a genetic risk. So as you can see, looking at this person, their vitamin B12 genetic risk coming across normal. Vitamin C, they have an elevated issue with that. So they're going to actually now go on to another report and actually explain to you what's going on. And I believe I chose biotin to just elaborate upon that. And they'll actually show you the 3 columns of the actual nutrient value as we discussed serum, so the blood level, RBC, and then WBC. And they'll kind of do the trend line and kind of show you where you're at. So they give it to you kind of in different windows, if for lack of a better word, to really see from different perspectives, basically. Okay, so I took a sample of this one. I thought this was interesting. So we're talking about biotin. We all are very familiar with biotin. Anybody who wants great hair, nails, that kind of stuff, we all want to make sure we have enough biotin. So it's known as vitamin B7. As you know, there's several B vitamins starting from B1 to B9. Folate is involved in that. So B7 is biotin, and they just explain to you that it's an essential vitamin and it helps with gluconeogenesis, amino acid metabolism, fatty acids. They tell you where it's found in, what foods have a rich source of it. So egg yolk, dairy, breast milk, liver, that kind of stuff. And then they'll show you your result again. They'll elaborate upon that. So you have the SNP ID, they'll give you that, the result, the genetic, and then elevated risk. So what does that mean? So they actually will go in the next paragraph and they say, now with that particular SNP, the BTD, which is the biotinidase, that is the enzyme that actually recycles biotin. So this person has an elevated risk to have the increase in terms of recycling the biotin. So they're not appropriately using it and sequestering it for the body to use it. So it doesn't matter how high their level is, because this enzyme is kind of on overdrive. It's now what it's doing, it's not allowing the biotin to be reused, and you are going to then in effect almost have a deficiency of biotin. Your body's going to sense that you're kind of deficient in it because it's not being used in the proper way. And then they'll explain to you what the importance is of biotin. If we don't have enough of that optimal level of the biotin, that you might have increased risk for seizures or muscle weakness, breathing problems, hearing, vision loss, ataxia, where you're going to have issues with maybe motor control, skin rashes, hair loss, candidiasis. And this goes nicely too. I do a lot of gut health testing and, looking at people and what kind of issues they have with their gut. Candida is a big one, H. pylori, all those kind of things. And then they explain to you who are the individuals who have more of the risk, how it can be treated, and then again, reiterating what foods are high in that, or what kind of, supplementation that you might do too. So it's a combination of reworking their diet, realigning things, and getting them on proper, what I call physician regulated pharmaceutical grade supplements. These are high quality supplements. I never let my patients just go to a store, buy things off the internet. There is no FDA regulation on nutraceuticals. So you have to be very careful in what you tell people to get. I do find a lot of people who are on tons of vitamins, because everybody loves being on vitamins. But when they have labs done, I'm like, wow, you're really deficient in this vitamin. They're like, no, that's crazy. I've been on this vitamin for a long time. Either they're taking a wrong dose, they're taking something that's just not good quality, and it could be harming them if they have additional preservatives and additives in them. When you're doing physician regulated supplements, you're actually having them take very high quality, pure, they're gluten-free, wheat-free, dairy-free, soy-free, they're very pure, and they actually make a difference. And when patients get repeat labs, I often find a huge improvement in that. The importance of nutrigenomics, just to summarize, again, is it's looking to research and to study the genome-wide influence of nutrition, right? What we're eating and how it's affecting our genes, what it's doing to us in the long term. So when we're looking at preventing diseases down the road, right? Someone might say, well, I have a high risk of diabetes in my family. I'm really scared to get it. So I'm going to work with them, get their labs done, make sure that their hemoglobin A1C, their other markers, everything else looks good, counsel them on their diet, and tell them following, these types of foods and macros and micros is going to lower your risk for developing this down the road. People who do maybe have a diet that's high in saturated fat, for example, and have a high risk of diabetes, I do explain to them that it's not just the sugar, it's the saturated fat that really is implicated in causing insulin resistance, right? Because saturated fat is blocking the cells from utilizing the insulin and allowing our cells and our muscles to uptake the glucose. So we have free floating glucose in our blood, which causes hyperglycemia, elevated blood sugars, then leads to insulin resistance and diabetes. So it's like a cascade of events. You really have to know how to explain this to the patients and explain why you're doing the tests and how it's going to, translate into what they're doing overall. Nutrigenomics is a very important part of personalized nutrition. Those of you who like to offer information or send people off to nutritionists, et cetera, dietitians, this is a big part of it. So sharing these results with them, making sure they have it in their hand and can share it with other people who want to do it. I do a lot of nutritional counseling in my practice, just because when I do the test, I really guide people, again, being more plant-based and try to have people eliminate more animal protein and dairy, et cetera, is key into how I get people to lose weight, reduce the risk of cardiovascular disease, and also reduce the need for pharmaceuticals. A lot of people come to me because they don't want to be on pharmaceuticals. There are a lot of adverse side effects. But there is a time and place if they absolutely need it. I will, do it, but it's not a long-term cure. Pharmaceuticals for me are just placing a temporary Band-Aid, and long-term effects of pharmaceuticals can be detrimental, as you can see from the adverse side effects when we see what pharmaceuticals can do. Nutrigenomics will inform research into the nutritional requirements and responses of humans and the genetic basis of their diversity across a wide range of traits. So again, I know I'm just kind of reiterating and it's a little repetitive, but it's simple. It's a simple concept. How our food is influencing the outcome of our genetics, and then the long-term outcomes of whether we develop chronic diseases or not. It's just vibrant wellness, and that was it. I just wanted to keep it kind of succinct and short. And so that's it. So if you guys have questions, I'd be happy to answer a few questions.
Thank you so much, Dr. Verma. That was really informative.
Thank you.
All right, so let's see.
I can stop my share if you want. Let me stop my share. Okay.
Perfect. If we have a few questions coming in.
Okay.
All right, so we have, am I understanding correctly that the NutriPro provides the nutrient levels, such as the micronutrient test, as well as a genetic test? Or is there a difference? Could you dive into that a little bit more?
Yeah, so the NutriPro panel is looking at, they're looking at the SNPs, right? So when you saw in that report, they're actually going to list out the genetics of that with response or in relation to the micronutrient levels. So this is looking at the this is not a micronutrient panel, because then we can just do a micronutrient panel basically, right? And just look at the levels of the vitamins and minerals and antioxidants. So this is actually combining the genetics with the nutrients. So you're getting both of them in this, yes.
Okay. Let's see if we have any more. There are some good questions. All right, we have one question. What is the recommended dose for hetero C677 and 1298 for B12 and methylfolate?
So
very specific.
Yeah, that's very specific. I do a lot of physician regulated supplements, and the companies that I love using are Zymogen. They're like whole scripts now. I do orthomolecular. So, and I do a lot of IV therapy and things like that. So when I'm looking at that, there's really no set dose, to be honest. It's really based on what I do is I look at their levels. So I get really good micronutrient levels. With MTHFR, and we're talking about those two specific mutations, we're looking at anywhere from, they go in kind of micrograms. You can go as high as 10,000 micrograms, which is like 10,000 micrograms, micrograms. Or if we're talking milligrams, like 1 milligram methyl B12. Now there are people, I have to say, I have had people come to me who have MTHFR and they're like, I don't do good on methyl B12, and they actually do better on hydroxycobalamin or cyanocobalamin. This is where you have to get a little more nitty gritty and look at some other genetic variations with this, like people do the MAO and the COMT, because not everybody is going to have, you know, the same response to these things. I mean, I typically will do the methyl B12 and methylfolate, but I typically will do a milligram. I'm looking at about a milligram of the B12, and a lot of times I'll combine it with the methylfolate as well too. So my favorite brands, again, I love the Zymogen brands. They have they have methyl B12, methylfolate, they have methyl protect. Another one I love using is orthomolecular. They have one called methyl CPG. And I can't remember off the top of my head. I'll have to get up and just go look at the bottles there. But they are in that range of about 1 milligram I'm looking at for the B12. I'm just going to clarify that. I might have to get up and go look at that. So.
Perfect. And then another question is, how do we know that the white blood cell intracellular is longer term than serum?
Well, serum is it's what's floating around in your blood, right? So it's kind of a quick thing. What we're storing inside our cells is going to be more long-term. So whatever's on our serum is kind of changing. It's fluctuating on a daily basis. It's highly influenced by, you know, what we're eating and what we're doing. What we're sequestering in the cells is certainly going to be much more long-term. So that is why when we're looking at this testing, it's important. Like I've actually had patients say like, okay, Dr. Verma, I just don't want a serum magnesium. I want like an RBC magnesium. I guess they've done their research. They really know that's a little bit more accurate. So when we're looking at serum, it's just a little more, what's that word? I can't find the right word, but it fluctuates quickly. So when we're looking at things, you want to look at the intracellular levels to get more of that long-term. It's like looking at, for example, glucose versus hemoglobin A1C, right? Hemoglobin A1C, we're looking at the actual hemoglobin, the red blood cell, the glycated version. So that's going to be a more chronic marker. You typically like a 3-month look over what your sugars have been. Whereas just looking at a serum glucose is kind of like, you know, I've had people like, they're really, really clean eaters, but they had a sugar spike because of, oh yeah, I totally had my berry smoothie this morning and then I had my blood drawn. So that's just a more acute way of looking at things versus a chronic intracellular way.
Definitely. Perfect. And then what type of samples are needed for this test?
So this is blood, where they would be just a blood draw that people would be doing. And that they'll be able to tell. So with the blood draw, then they can classify it into the serum, WBC, RBC. That's the best way to do it. I haven't really seen any other way. The other way that I've seen it, the other test that I used to use was they used to be called Pathway Genomics. They're called OmCare now. They have the Pathway Fit, the fitness testing. That was saliva. So they do their genetics, all their genetics with saliva testing. And they have their genetics and what kind of diet that you need to follow, like kind of the macros and different characteristics, like what kind of exercise program, how you metabolize caffeine. But this one is blood.
Okay. And then how static or modifiable are these gene expressions in time?
So this is where we get into epigenetics, like what over time, I mean, it's going to take, you know, where we have mutations really occurring over time. Sometimes it's generational, right? So it's kind of like, this is more of a chronic thing that's going to happen over time. And what we can do is influence the epigenetics on a more acute level by really changing what we eat. I find that changing our diet can immediately change really not just how you're feeling, but more of the risks of what you're going to get later on. And I monitor that really by getting labs done. If someone comes in their hemoglobin A1C is in the pre-diabetic range and they're 5.9, just by a diet change in 3 to 6 months, they've already mitigated that risk and modified it. And now their hemoglobin A1C in their next time when I check, whether it's 3 to 6 months later, is going to be, miraculously it's 5.2. So I see the acute change, but in the more chronic things in terms of the genetics, right? What's passed down from generation to generation, that takes a longer, that's more static, I guess. We're saying dynamic versus static, where I say acute versus chronic. That's going to take time. to really see that more of that acute change is going to be really making those changes in the diet, checking their labs. That's where you're going to see the quicker change.
Definitely. Okay, great. And then I believe the last question we'll get to this evening would be, could you explain a little further how the genetics and food we eat are tied together?
I'm sorry, Emily, say that last part. I'm sorry.
Oh, I apologize. Could you explain further how the genetics and food we eat are tied together?
Right. So when we're eating inflammatory foods, for example, so we're eating, say we're just having a diet that's high in saturated fats, perhaps a lot of meat and dairy and things like that. What we're doing is we're setting off an inflammatory cascade in the body, right? So this now goes to the cellular level, and that one slide that I had that was really busy, looking at that hot dog versus the broccoli. When you're eating these saturated fatty foods, inflammatory foods, processed foods, we are affecting now the cellular level, what's happening at that level, how the ATP production, we're draining our cells of all that energy because these foods take a toll on us. So what they're doing is they're upregulating these inflammatory cascades, and they're setting off a chain reaction, basically. So over time, it's now going to cause a setup for developing these chronic diseases over time. And we go into these states of like insulin resistance, obesity, cardiovascular disease. So this is occurring over time, and it's influencing how we express our genes on that level. Whereas if you're eating a more cleaner diet and healthy diet, you're down regulating those inflammatory cascades. And what I tell people is we're eating, and this is a concept of intermittent fasting. And I just did a podcast for Prolon. That's a big, I'm sure some of you have heard of that. It's a 5-day fasting mimicking it. And intermittent fasting, it's giving the body rest. We inundate our body with so much crappy food. No, and excuse my language, but we put such a toll on our body that all the energies that we need to preserve the cellular processes, to slow down aging, to improve our longevity, is now redirected to digesting these foods that are so hard for our body to digest and incorporate. Like, what are we really getting from eating a diet that's so high in saturated fats with meat and dairy? There's not much that we're getting. So we're putting a toll and a burden on the body, and all these energy processes and cellular mechanisms are now diverted to that. And that's why people a lot of times, I mean, you might have experienced it yourself, and I have patients who literally tell me, Dr. Verma, I was plant-based for 2 months, for 3 months. I felt great. I felt energetic. I slept well. My bowel movements were fine. And then I fell off the wagon. I went on vacation. I was hanging out with family. We were partying, and I had burgers, and I had steak, and I had a lot of wine, and I had this and that. And I felt sluggish. I got constipated. I felt tired. And that's exactly what happens is, not only do you have the physical feeling, but on that cellular level, all that energy that should be used for preserving your adrenal health, your energies, all those things are now diverted to digesting these foods. And that's how you're going to feel. You're going to feel sluggish and tired. You're going to feel like you don't want to do anything. And it affects us mentally. I've had people say, once they went plant-based and cut out the amount of meat that they were eating, that they felt great. Their mood changed. They felt not as depressed or anxious, because we think about all the hormones and the antibiotics and everything. And even if you're eating organic in America, unfortunately, we don't really have great FDA regulation on that. And I literally have people tell me, I've been to Europe, I was eating croissants and having wine and having the meats. They felt different. They came here and they did the same thing and ate meat and had wine and had their croissants, and they felt terrible because the food quality is different. In Europe, they very strict regulations. They ban ingredients or preservatives and carcinogens that we allow here, unfortunately. And we have the California Proposition 65 list, which has over 900 carcinogens on there. And even something as simple as coffee as acrylamide when you overprocess it, which is a known carcinogen. And in other countries, I just read an article not too long ago in Singapore, I think it was, if they use a certain ingredient when making their bread, which is a known carcinogen, it's on our list, they will be fined $450,000 and be put in jail for 15 years. That does not happen in America. We know that we have pesticides and carcinogens and toxic chemicals, even in baby food and baby products. Yet, it's just kind of, we maybe turn a blind eye to it, or we don't want to talk about it. But unfortunately, it's not even our fault. We're just conditioned to think a certain way. And we're told that, eat your cold cereal, like having a box, a bowl of cereal in the morning. If you read about that how many chemicals and things that are in there, So the point is, what we eat greatly influences our genetics and the outcome of our disease processes, in a nutshell.
Thank you so much, Dr. Verma. That was really, that entire presentation and all of your answers to those questions were so informative. So thank you.
Just want to clarify that thing about B12. Just for example, a good methylcobalamin, you want about 1,000 micrograms. So that would be a milligram, right? Because we're times it by 1,000. And for folate, you're looking anywhere from about 1 to 2,000 micrograms for folate. I do a lot of, IV therapy, and I add those things in. So, when you're doing that, you're bypassing the gut. So you're able to absorb that more fully at 100% efficacy. So those are pretty much the general recommendations for those two.
Perfect. Great. Well, thank you again, Dr. Verma. This was really such a great presentation. And thank you everyone for watching. Again, this will be featured on the Vibrant YouTube channel, as well as our educational portal within a few business days. Yeah, and thank you so much, Dr. Verma, again.
Thanks, Emily. It was great. Thank you for having me.
Yes, have a good night, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.